The digital clock over the medication cart clicked from 11:51 to 11:52 p.m., and rain struck the pediatric urgent care windows in hard diagonal lines that made the parking lot lights look smeared and underwater. Grace Santos stood at the nurse's station with wet cuffs clinging to her wrists, finished updating a toddler's discharge chart, and opened her wallet with the same small dread she had carried all month. 2 tens, 3 fives, 7 ones, a wrinkled quarter, 3 dimes, a nickel, 3 pennies. $38.63, counted twice, then tucked back behind her ID badge as if careful handling could make it grow. Her lower back throbbed from a 16-hour shift stretched into 18. The coffee in her paper cup had gone cold an hour earlier, but she still held it for heat. Her phone vibrated against the counter, then vibrated again before the first pulse ended. She flipped it over without unlocking it. 14 missed calls from Tomas Aranda sat at the top of her screen in a red block of insistence, all between 8:14 and 11:49. Each one a small pressure point against her rib cage. A text preview glowed underneath. "Pick up. We need to discuss Elena." He always used discuss when he meant demand. Her throat tightened, and she slid the phone into the deep pocket of her scrub pants, beneath folded patient labels and a bent pen light that barely worked. She had learned that answering after midnight never reduced the damage. It only changed its timing. "Grace, can you check room 4? Neb treatment's done." Priya called from triage, voice rough from overuse. Grace nodded and moved, because moving was easier than standing still with numbers in her head. Rent was 3 weeks overdue. The landlord's last voicemail had shifted from polite to procedural. Elena's inhaled corticosteroid refill was due Friday, and the pharmacy had already denied one emergency extension this quarter. A primary care follow-up was still unscheduled because the clinic wanted a copay up front. Bus card balance, $11. Her checking account, -12 by her own estimate once the utility autopay hit. She walked into room 4 with a practiced smile, checked the child's oxygen saturation, adjusted a too large dinosaur blanket over tiny knees, and spoke softly to a mother who looked as exhausted as she felt. Professional tone cost nothing. She gave it freely. By 12:18 a.m., the waiting room had thinned to 2 families and a teenager with a wrapped wrist who kept glancing at the vending machine. Grace updated medication logs and tried not to think about Elena asleep across town in Rosa Jimenez's apartment, probably curled under the sunflower blanket she dragged room to room when her breathing got tight. Rosa had sent a photo at 10:03 p.m. Elena's hair in a crooked braid, 1 sock on, 1 sock missing, asleep with a coloring pencil still in her hand. Grace looked at that photo once per hour when she could steal 10 seconds. It was both relief and ache. Elena had school in 7 hours. Grace had promised to walk her to the bus stop this week, all 5 days, and had managed 2. She went to the supply closet for sterile gauze and let her forehead touch the cool metal shelf for a moment that was almost prayer and almost surrender. She did body inventory the way she taught anxious parents to do breathing counts. Head dull and heavy, neck tight, right shoulder burning, spine aching, hunger sharp but distant, hands steady only while occupied. Keys, phone, staff badge, the fold-out envelope with late notices she kept meaning to open all the way. She pushed off the shelf and returned to the hall before anyone could ask if she was all right. At work, all right was not a feeling. It was a task list completed on time. Near 1 in the morning, doctor. Liao found her entering vitals and said, without preamble, "You're still on for that private post-op assignment at 9. Grace blinked. For a second, she had forgotten she had said yes. At the Vescary residence. He gave a brief nod. They asked for pediatric recovery oversight after a minor procedure for a family member's child. 12-hour daytime block, maybe shorter. Agency rate is triple your standard. Paid same day if they sign off. Triple. The word moved through her like warm air after cold rain. Then caution followed. Elite households had rules layered over rules. You entered through service corridors, addressed everyone by title, never asked personal questions, never looked surprised by anything. She had done one private shift before, 2 years ago, and spent the full time feeling like she had tracked mud onto polished floors, even in clean shoes. Still, same-day pay meant medication by Friday, partial rent by Saturday, maybe no final warning letter taped to her door. "I'm on," she said. "I'll be there." "Transportation voucher should already be in your inbox," Dr. Liao said. "And Grace?" He softened his voice a fraction. "Get at least 2 hours of sleep before you go." She almost laughed at the arithmetic of that instruction, but she only nodded. "I'll try." At 1:37 a.m., her phone buzzed again. Unknown number this time. She ignored it. 2 minutes later, Rosa called, and Grace answered before the first ring finished. "Everything okay?" Grace asked, already halfway out of her chair. "Everything's fine," Rosa said quickly. "Breathe." Elena coughed once, so I checked her. No wheeze. She's sleeping. "I called because your ex came by the building around 10:30. Didn't get in. Mr. Davila told him to leave." Grace closed her eyes. Rain rattled against the glass. "He saw Elena?" "No. He never got past the front door. But he stood there smiling like he was waiting for applause. I didn't like it. Neither did Grace. Tomas smiling meant calculation, not calm. "Thank you for calling." "You don't thank family for doing normal things," Rosa said, brusque and kind in the same breath. "Come get your girl when your shift ends, and eat something before you faint in front of rich people." The line clicked off before Grace could object. She stared at the dark screen for a long second, then opened the tiny snack drawer under the desk and found half a granola bar wrapped in wax paper. She ate it in 3 bites and drank lukewarm water from a paper cup that tasted faintly of bleach and cardboard. Outside, a siren passed, then another. Then the rain swallowed both. By 2:20 a.m., paperwork replaced adrenaline. Grace reconciled narcotics counts with the night supervisor, checked crash cart seals, and signed off on 2 handover notes. Protocol steadied her. The boxes had edges. The steps had sequence. Nothing in that narrow world shifted without a timestamp. At 2:48, she finally opened Tomas's texts, not to answer, but to assess. 6 messages in a row, each polished in that particular way he used in public and in court filings, weaponized civility wrapped around threat. "You are violating parenting boundaries. I can petition for immediate review. You are unstable if you think your schedule excuses non-response. Call me in 10 minutes. Do not make this difficult. I am being polite." She took screenshots and forwarded them to her attorney's intake email, even though she could not afford another billed hour this month. Subject line: Documentation, 2:14 overnight. She tagged the messages and archived them in a folder named Elena. Then she blocked the unknown number from earlier and sat very still until the trembling in her fingers eased. She had promised herself after the divorce that she would build paper trails instead of arguments, evidence instead of pleading, date, time, wording, pattern. A little after 3:30, the last patient transfer went out, and the wings settled into that strained, quiet hospitals carried between emergencies. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. The floors smelled of antiseptic and wet umbrellas. Grace changed into dry socks she kept in her locker and swapped her soaked scrub top for an older one with a repaired seam at the shoulder. She checked the transportation voucher. Pickup at 7:10 a.m., destination listed as Viscari Tower, private residence access, floor 39. Dress code: clinical professional, neutral tones, no fragrance. Arrival protocol attached in 3 pages of clipped instructions. She read every line twice. At 4:05, she sat in the break room with her charting tablet, set an alarm for 26 minutes, and rested her head against the vinyl bench without closing her fist around her phone. Sleep came in fragments, thin and shallow, interrupted by phantom alarms and the memory of Tomas's courtroom smile. When the real alarm chimed, her neck screamed and her mouth was dry. But she got up immediately. She washed her face in cold water until her skin prickled, tied her hair into a tighter knot, and reapplied the clear nail polish she used to keep one thumbnail from splitting at the edge. Small maintenance was still maintenance. Dawn arrived gray and reluctant. By 6:42 a.m., she had signed out, collected her lunch from the fridge, and crossed the slick lot to the bus stop because the voucher pickup point was 2 blocks east. Rain had weakened to a fine mist, enough to bead on her jacket and settle into the fabric. The city smelled like wet concrete, diesel, and bakery steam from a corner shop unlocking for the morning rush. Her stomach twisted when she thought of the envelope on her kitchen table marked "Final Notice." But she kept walking. Each step had a destination attached to it. Rosa's building, Elena's morning hug, then the private shift. Work before panic. Task before fear. At 7:26, she reached Rosa's apartment long enough to kiss Elena's forehead and check her rescue inhaler spacer for cracks. Elena blinked up at her, sleepy and warm, and whispered, "You're damp again, Mommy," with a seriousness that made Grace smile despite herself. "Big house shift today?" Elena asked. "Big house shift," Grace confirmed, smoothing a flyaway curl from Elena's cheek. "I'll be back before bedtime." "Promise?" "Promise." She tucked the sunflower blanket higher and made Rosa repeat the noon dose schedule while she wrote it again on a sticky note, even though both of them already knew it by memory. 3 days of rain had swollen the gutters and darkened every brick facade by the time Grace stepped out of the hired car in front of Viscari Tower at 8:51 a.m. The building rose in pale stone and mirrored glass, severe and immaculate, as if weather and debt and custody threats could not cross its threshold without permission. A doorman in a tailored charcoal coat checked her ID against a tablet without looking surprised, then directed her toward a private elevator bank lined in black marble veined with silver. Her shoes made no sound on the floor. The overhead lights fractured in crystal fixtures and fell in clean geometric patterns across the walls. She adjusted the strap of her worn medical bag, straightened her badge, and stared at her reflection in the elevator doors. Tired eyes, damp hairline, scrub top ironed at dawn over a kitchen chair, jaw set a little too hard. Her phone stayed silent for the first time all night, and the quiet was not comfort. It was a pause with edges. When the elevator arrived, the doors slid open to mirrored steel and a gold panel marked 39. And Grace stepped inside with her pulse climbing as the numbers began to rise. The elevator rose with a smoothness that made Grace more uneasy than the rattling hospital lift she used every night. 32, 33, 34. Her ears popped lightly, and she shifted the strap of her bag higher on her shoulder while reading the printed arrival protocol one last time from memory. Present credentials, sanitize, await assignment, speak only to designated household staff regarding patient care. At 37, her phone vibrated once in her pocket, and she glanced down long enough to see Rosa's name and a single message: "School boiler leak. Sending Elena with Marta in your car service. Inhaler in blue pouch." Sorry. Grace's pulse kicked hard, then settled into the familiar rhythm of adaptive panic. She typed back with stiff thumbs. Received. Thank you. Keep phone on. When the doors opened onto floor 39, warm air touched her face, carrying lemon polish, expensive coffee, and the faint, sterile note of medical disinfectant that had likely been deployed 5 minutes before she arrived. The private foyer looked less like a home than a hotel designed to remind people they were small. Black marble underfoot, pale stone columns, a chandelier that fractured light into steady geometric shards. A woman in a dark tailored suit stood waiting beside a narrow console table with a tablet and a stack of badges arranged with military precision. Grace Santos, the woman said, checking the tablet first and Grace second. I am Adriana Bellini, house manager. You will address me as Ms. Bellini on this floor. We are on modified recovery protocol. Follow me. Yes, Ms. Bellini? You are 6 minutes early. Good. The approval felt procedural, not kind, but Grace took it anyway. She sanitized her hands at a crystal dispenser that probably cost more than her monthly rent, clipped on a temporary badge, and walked half a step behind Ms. Bellini through a corridor lined with muted, abstract paintings and doors that disappeared into the walls. Staff moved quietly in coordinated lanes. A steward with pressed gloves carrying covered trays, a security officer murmuring into an earpiece, a housekeeper pushing a linen cart that smelled of starch and lavender. No one rushed, but everyone moved, as if each second had a designated owner. At the end of the corridor, Ms. Bellini stopped in front of a sitting room that opened into a larger lounge where 3 women in vintage silk and lacquered smiles stood around a glass table reviewing floral samples. One wore pearls the size of marbles. Another held a tablet in one hand and a champagne flute in the other, even though it was barely 9 in the morning. Grace tried to pass unnoticed, eyes on her assignment folder. But the woman with pearls turned and looked straight at her scrubs and worn bag strap. Service is through the west pantry, the woman said, already looking away. And someone should really brief temp staff on presentation. Heat climbed Grace's neck so fast, it almost made her dizzy. She stopped because stopping was safer than pretending she hadn't heard. Ms. Bellini pivoted with deliberate calm, her expression unchanged. Mrs. Castell, she said, voice cool as glass. This is Miss Santos, the pediatric nurse contracted for recovery oversight. She's here at my request. A beat of silence followed. Mrs. Castell's smile thinned, then returned in a brighter, sharper version that did not reach her eyes. Of course. My mistake. So many moving parts. Grace forced her jaw to unclench. No problem. Ms. Bellini's gaze flicked to Grace's face, then to her badge. On this floor, Ms. Santos, we use formal introductions when entering a room with guests. You will announce your role clearly. Protocol prevents confusion. It was correction delivered in public, with enough politeness to make protest look unprofessional. Grace swallowed the sting and nodded. Understood. From the lounge, one of the other women murmured something about donor seating and resumed discussing centerpieces as if Grace had dissolved back into the architecture. The class contrast landed like a physical thing. Her repaired scrubs seam under crystal light, their soft silk sleeves brushing imported stone. She kept her shoulders level and followed Miss Bellini down another hall. Personal effects remain on your person unless security requests review, Ms. Bellini said. No photography, no social communication identifying this location. If you need anything, you ask me or Chief Rinaldi. Is that clear? Yes, Ms. Bellini. They entered a bright recovery suite, where a child about 8 slept in an adjustable bed with cartoon sharks on the blanket and a pulse ox monitor glowing green at the bedside. Post-op chart on the counter, fluid schedule marked in neat columns, pediatric dosing pre-approved and signed by a private physician. The setup was extravagant and competent at once. Grace stepped into work mode immediately, checked the monitor placement, reviewed medication intervals, confirmed airway equipment was present and functional. Tasks steadied her breathing. A soft knock sounded behind her. A housekeeper in a gray uniform stood at the door with Elena beside her, sunflower backpack hanging from one shoulder, hair still in Rosa's crooked morning braid. Elena looked small in the oversized hallway light, but her chin lifted the moment she found Grace. "Mommy." Grace crossed the room in 3 steps and crouched so Elena could fold into her without strain. Rain dampened the child's jacket cuffs. Her cheek was warm. "You okay?" El edificio had steam and everyone had to leave, Elena whispered. "Marta said I get to be quiet and brave in the fancy place." "Exactly that." Grace kissed her forehead, then looked up at the housekeeper. "Thank you for bringing her." The woman nodded. "I'm Teresa. Ms. Bellini said the nursery alcove is available when you're with the patient. I can stay nearby." Relief and embarrassment crossed Grace at the same time. She had not asked for accommodation, and she knew accommodations always came with ledger lines in places like this. "I appreciate it." Ms. Bellini appeared in the doorway, as if summoned by the thought. "Dependent exception approved for today, only due municipal school closure. Child remains supervised in designated areas. No access to lounge during reception planning. Do you understand me?" "I do," Grace said. Elena tightened her grip on Grace's sleeve, then released it when Grace gave her the small nod they used in clinics and waiting rooms. "Stay close. Ask first. Tell me if your chest feels tight." Grace settled Elena in the nursery alcove adjoining the recovery suite, spread out a folded blanket from the backpack, set the blue inhaler pouch on the side table within reach, and handed her a billing envelope from her own bag when she realized the crayons had gone missing somewhere between Rosa's stairwell and the car. "Paper's weird," Elena said, rubbing the envelope edge between her fingers. "It's what we have." Grace found a pen and clicked it for her. "Quiet art mission." Elena accepted the assignment with solemn concentration, legs tucked under her, tongue peeking out while she drew. Grace returned to the bedside chart and entered baseline notes with meticulous timestamps. At 9:17 a.m., she sent Rosa a quick update. "She's with me. Breathing clear. Thank you." Rosa replied with 3 heart emojis and a warning to drink water. Grace almost smiled. By 9:40, the reception activity in the lounge had grown louder in controlled bursts. Heels on stone, clipped instructions, a burst of laughter cut short when someone important entered, and the room recalibrated around that presence. Grace kept her focus on blood pressure trends and medication windows. Yet she noticed every shift in sound anyway. Survival had trained her ears to map risk from tone alone. Elena padded over 20 minutes later, holding the envelope with both hands. "Done." Grace glanced down, expecting flowers or a cat, or one of Elena's elaborate houses with 3 suns. Instead, she saw 3 stick figures holding hands under a rectangular sky filled with slanting rain lines. One figure had long hair and a red dot for a badge. One was small with a yellow square that might be the sunflower backpack. The third was tall, drawn in heavy black pen strokes from shoulders to knees, as if wrapped in a dark coat. Over each head, Elena had printed labels in block letters that leaned left. "Mommy, me, safe, man." Grace's throat tightened. "Who is this, Carino?" Elena tapped the black figure. "The man in the black coat." Grace kept her voice even. "Do I know him?" "You saw him 2 times. Elena frowned, searching for chronology. "At the pharmacy when it was dark and the lights made your face blue. and near the bus stop with the broken ad glass, he said, "Stay near the light, little star." A cold line moved down Grace's spine. "When did he talk to you?" "He talked where you could hear, but you were counting coins and looking in your wallet." Elena's small shoulder lifted. "He didn't touch me. He talked like doctors talk when the room gets loud." Grace replayed late evenings in her mind. Pharmacy line, rain, bus shelter, men loitering near the curb, her own fatigue narrowing vision to immediate tasks. A tailored dark coat at the edge of memory. Dark hair. Stillness. Not approaching, just present. Protection or surveillance could look identical from a distance. That was the dangerous truth. She crouched and smoothed Elena's braid with careful fingers. "If anyone speaks to you and I haven't introduced them, you tell me right away. Always." "I know." Elena tilted her head. "But he said to stay by lights. That was good." "It was," Grace admitted softly. "You still tell me." A discreet chime sounded from a panel near the nursery door, followed by Chief Rinaldi's voice through an intercom, low and controlled. "Miss Santos, security check at service entrance. No action required. Please remain in current room." No action required was exactly what people said when action was very possible. Grace stood, moved Elena gently behind her, and stepped to the threshold where she could see part of the service corridor through a glass inset. A young valet in charcoal uniform stood near the far door, hands clasped too tight, knuckles pale. Even at distance, she could see the tremor in his right wrist. Rinaldi faced him with predatory stillness. The valet swallowed and spoke louder than necessary, voice fraying at the edges. "Mr. Aranda is asking politely. He says he has paternal rights and wishes to see his daughter." The corridor seemed to narrow around the words. Grace's skin prickled. Tomas always started with rights and wishes, legal vocabulary polished to hide coercion. In her chest, old fear collided with fresh anger. She took one step back toward Elena and forced her breathing into measured counts. Rinaldi answered without raising his voice. "Mr. Aranda has no scheduled access. He can submit requests through counsel." "He said," the valet continued, eyes fixed on a point above Rinaldi's shoulder, "that delay would be interpreted as non-cooperation." A security monitor beside the intercom flickered. Camera feed for Corridor C blinked to black, then returned with static grain before resolving. A timestamp in the corner jumped forward 12 seconds. Grace stared at the numbers and felt the room tilt by a degree she could not prove to anyone else. Rinaldi touched his earpiece. "Control, confirm dropout duration." A woman's voice replied from unseen speakers. 12 seconds, sir. Investigating source." Thunder rolled across the building hard enough to vibrate the glass panel. Rain struck the exterior in sudden sheets, louder than before, turning the world beyond the windows into moving gray. Elena edged closer and caught Grace's scrub hem in her fist. "Mommy." Grace kept her eyes on the corridor. "You're okay. Stay right by me." The valet was dismissed and hurried away with the rigid gait of someone trying not to run. Rinaldi remained in place, speaking quietly into his mic, issuing instructions Grace could not fully hear. "Lock West access. Double at service stair. Confirm legal packet status." The words landed in fragments, but their direction was clear. At 10:02 a.m., Ms. Bellini arrived carrying a small tray with juice, crackers, and a formal expression that did not hide urgency. "For Elena, we are adjusting movement protocol for this wing." Grace accepted the tray with numb fingers. "Because Tomas is downstairs?" "Because an uninvited party made contact at a controlled entrance," Ms. Bellini replied. "Language matters." Grace almost laughed at the precision, then didn't. "He used to smile before he broke things," she said quietly. "Not always objects." For the first time, Ms. Bellini's face shifted from protocol to recognition. "Then we will not rely on smiles." She touched the intercom key. "Chief, Nursery and Recovery Suite request visual sweep." "On it," Rinaldi answered. Two security officers passed the glass inset in a practiced pattern, checked hinges, checked lock plates, checked adjoining service door. Efficient, reassuring on paper. Grace still felt her pulse against the inside of her injured wrist like a warning bell. 5 minutes later, the corridor went still. No footsteps, no lounge chatter. Even the clink of reception setup had faded, as if someone had lowered the volume on the entire floor. Grace listened harder, every muscle tight. And then she heard it. Measured steps approaching on thick carpet, slowing near the nursery entrance, then stopping directly outside the door. No knock followed. No voice announced itself. Elena's fingers tightened around her hand as the silence pressed in, dense and deliberate, and Grace understood with icy clarity that this was how Tomas always began. The silence outside the nursery door held for 3 long breaths, and then Ms. Bellini spoke from the corridor in that same clipped, neutral cadence she used for tray inventories and staffing schedules. "Ms. Santos, I need you in the lounge. Now." Grace did not open the door until Chief Rinaldi stepped into view behind her. Broad-shouldered, earpiece in place, one palm lifted to show it was him. His expression was controlled, but the muscle along his jaw was set hard enough to telegraph strain. Grace knelt and touched Elena's cheek. "Stay with Teresa in the alcove," she said. "Blue pouch stays with you. If I say move, you move with Teresa. No questions." Elena nodded, solemn, already reading the fear behind Grace's calm voice. Teresa crossed to the child and took her hand without fuss. Grace stood, rolled her sore shoulder once, and followed Ms. Bellini into the corridor, where the polished floor reflected everyone in fractured lines. The lounge opened ahead in a wash of crystal light and low voices. Floral mock-up still covered the glass table. Pale peonies and white orchids arranged in expensive symmetry. Mrs. Castell and the other women stood near the fireplace with brittle social smiles frozen in place, pretending their attention belonged to donors' seating charts. It belonged to the man near the bar. Tomas Aranda wore a charcoal suit darkened at the cuffs from rain, hair combed back, tie perfectly centered, as if he had come to negotiate a merger instead of force a confrontation. He turned when Grace entered, and his smile arrived first. Polished, narrow, familiar in the worst way. "There you are," he said. "Warm enough for strangers, sharp enough for her. I was beginning to think you were hiding." Grace stopped several feet away and kept her hands open at her sides. "You were told there is no scheduled access." Tomas laughed softly and glanced at the room, performing reasonableness for the audience. "Scheduled access to my daughter?" He shook his head as if she had made a charming mistake. "Grace, do not do this. Not here." Ms. Bellini spoke without raising her voice. "Mr. Aranda, you are not cleared for this floor. Chief Rinaldi will escort you to legal intake if you wish to file a formal request." Tomas ignored her and took one smooth step toward Grace. "You work 2 jobs, Miss Rent, and drag Elena through night shifts. Yet you reject support because pride is more important than stability." His eyes moved over her scrub top, her worn bag, the taped seam at her cuff. "Charity case wages in a building like this. Do you hear how that sounds?" Heat climbed Grace's neck, but humiliation had long ago become a compartment she could lock while thinking. My finances are not your business. Everything about Elena is my business. He kept smiling. Legally, she is my responsibility, and I am done watching you make reckless choices. Mrs. Castell shifted, gaze fixed on her champagne flute. One of the other women looked toward the hallway and then away. No one intervened. The room ran on money and proximity to power. The easiest choice was silence. Tomas closed the distance and reached for Grace's left wrist. His grip landed exactly where old scar tissue crossed the tendon. Pain shot up her forearm so fast, her fingers went numb for a second. She drew breath through clenched teeth and refused to make a sound. "Do not touch me," she said. He leaned closer, still smiling for anyone watching from a distance. Under his breath, his tone changed, dropping the public polish. "You answer when I call. You produce her when I ask. Or I file emergency custody and tell the court you are unstable, exhausted, and unfit." Grace felt her throat tighten. Fear came first, instinctive and old. Then training returned in hard, practical pieces. Room geometry, exit points, cameras. Protocol panel at the corridor junction marked Pediatric Response, installed for the recovering child in her care. Her staff pin had temporary authorization for medical emergencies. If she triggered it, the suite corridor would seal by design. By 10:11 a.m., the charity reception had gone so quiet she could hear rain striking the glass 40 floors below. She shifted her weight, let her knees soften like she was giving in, and said loudly enough for witnesses, "You're hurting me." Tomas loosened just enough to avoid looking brutal. "Then cooperate." Grace turned her head toward Ms. Bellini. "I need my med bag from the nursery. Elena's inhaler is due." It was a lie by 15 minutes, but Ms. Bellini caught it. Her eyes sharpened. "Chief?" Rinaldi moved one step, testing Tomas's reaction. Tomas tightened his grip again. "No, she stays with me." That sentence gave Grace what she needed. Clear coercion in a room full of listeners. She lifted her free hand slowly, as if to steady herself, and brushed the inside seam of her pocket, where her phone already sat unlocked from charting. One tap opened video. Second tap sent live feed to the incident address, printed on her temporary badge. Security archive intake. She angled the camera down, hidden by her bag strap, catching their hands, his face in profile, audio clean. She met his eyes. "Say it again." He smirked, taking the bait because he believed control was the same as certainty. "You will come with me, and you will hand over my daughter today. If you make me force this, you lose her in court, and you know it." Grace pivoted on her heel and drove her thumb into the emergency panel beside the corridor door. "PIN. Confirm. Pediatric lockdown." A low alarm tone pulsed once, discreet but final. Glass partitions dropped from recessed ceiling tracks at both ends of the hall with a hydraulic hiss, sealing the lounge wing from elevator access and stairwell traffic. Red indicators switched to amber. Doors that had seemed decorative became barriers in less than 2 seconds. Guests gasped and stepped back. Mrs. Castell nearly dropped her flute. Tomas cursed and lunged, trying to pull Grace toward the nearest opening. But the partition slammed down between him and the main corridor, reflecting his own face back at him. Grace ripped her wrist free and stumbled back, pain flashing white-hot. "Chief, Elena now. Medication closet route." Rinaldi was already on comms. "Teresa, execute nursery transfer alpha. Move the child through back service door to protected suite. Repeat, protected suite." Teresa answered immediately, breath tight but steady. "Copy. Child with me. Moving." Grace's chest eased one notch at the confirmation. Elena was in motion away from him. That mattered more than anything else in the room. Tomas slammed his palm against the glass partition and rounded on Grace, composure splintering. "You think this stunt helps you? I can bury you in filings for years." The phone in Grace's pocket kept streaming. "You threatened abduction in front of witnesses," she said. "On record." He barked a laugh with no humor in it. "Record? You don't even know who owns the records in a place like this." He grabbed for her again. Rinaldi intercepted his forearm, and for a beat the two men locked in a controlled struggle, shoes sliding on marble. Tomas twisted, drove an elbow back, and broke the angle enough to wrench free. He pivoted toward the side service panel, seized a chrome fire stand, and struck the corner seam of the glass. The first blow spidered it. The second shattered a shoulder-width opening in a brittle crack that sent fragments skittering across the floor. Several guests cried out and retreated behind furniture. Ms. Bellini did not move, fingers flying over her tablet as she rerouted floor controls and alerted legal. Grace backed toward the nursery junction, pulse hammering so hard she could hear it in her ears. Tomas stepped through the broken section, breath rough, eyes bright with that old predatory focus she had feared for years. "You always make me do this," he said, and charged. For one heartbeat, Grace froze, body locked between fight and flight. Her injured hand would not close. Her throat narrowed to a thin line of air. She saw with awful clarity the distance to the nursery door, the slick crescent of glass near her shoe, the shape of his shoulder lowering as he came at her. A figure moved into that line before Tomas reached her. Matteo Vescari crossed from the far corridor in a black coat that fell sharp over a tailored suit, his stride economical, controlled, devastatingly precise. He did not shout. He did not hurry. He placed himself between Grace and Tomas with the certainty of a door locking. Tomas skidded and swung. Matteo caught his wrist mid-arc, redirected the momentum, and drove him sideways into the intact partition with a contained force that ended the charge without spectacle. Security closed in from both flanks. Matteo's voice was low, barely contained, carrying to every corner of the lounge. "Seal floor 39. Medical team here. No one touches her without my permission." Rinaldi answered instantly. "Yes, sir." Matteo did not look away from Tomas as he spoke again, each instruction clipped and final. "Preserve all feeds. Isolate audio from 10:08 onward. Call counsel. Notify family court liaison." "Yes, Mr. Vescari," Ms. Bellini said, already transmitting. Tomas strained against two guards now pinning his arms. "You don't get to interfere in family law." Matteo finally turned his head a fraction, dark eyes flat with controlled rage. "Attempted forced removal on my secured floor is not a domestic misunderstanding. It is a crime scene." He shifted his attention to Grace then, and the room's noise seemed to narrow around that glance. "Are you injured?" "My wrist," she managed. Old tendon scar reopened. "Doctor in 60 seconds, he said. "Where's the child?" "Transferred," Rinaldi replied through his mic. Protected suite reached. Therapist notified. Grace's knees nearly gave out with relief. Matteo caught that micro sway and gave a single order to the nearest medic arriving at a run. "Splint and evaluate now." The medic guided Grace to a chair near the wall. As the brace tightened around her wrist, pain settled into a deep throb. Across the room, Tomas kept talking, legal threats spilling faster as restraint removed his performance mask. Matteo listened without visible reaction until Tomas spat. "She belongs with me." The silence that followed was heavy and immediate. Matteo stepped closer, just inside Tomas's line of sight, and spoke in a tone that made even the guests stop breathing for a second. "She is not your property. he said. Neither of them is. Rinaldi took custody, escorting Tomas toward the secured service hold with 2 officers in formation. Ms. Bellini directed staff to clear guests and lock down access logs. Broken glass was cordoned, tagged, and photographed before anyone touched it. Grace watched all of it through a haze of adrenaline and pain, phone still recording in her pocket, until she finally ended the stream and sent the file to duplicate storage. Matteo remained where he was until Tomas disappeared behind the reinforced door, then faced Grace fully. Rain battered the windows in steady sheets, thunder rolling over the city like distant machinery. His expression did not soften, but his voice did by a degree. "You did the right thing," he said. "Do you understand me?" Grace held his gaze, fighting the tremor in her jaw. "I do." "Good." Matteo turned to the medic without wasting a beat. "Pain scale, mobility check, tendon integrity. If there is any doubt, ultrasound at St. Catherine's private wing. Car ready in 3 minutes." He shifted to Ms. Bellini. "Guest list, staff roster, and access logs from 9:30 onward on Council's desk in 10. No deletions, no summaries. Raw files only." Then to Rinaldi, who had just re-entered, rain on his shoulders and a tablet in his hand. "Where is Aranda now?" "Secured in service hold 2, Rinaldi said. "City police are en route. 4-minute ETA. Keep body cams on for transfer. He claims provocation. We answer with footage." The room moved around his orders like a mechanism locking into place. A second medic arrived with a compact ultrasound unit. The first cut away the old elastic wrap from Grace's wrist and replaced it with a rigid splint while calling findings into a recorder. "Localized swelling. Reopened scar line. No active bleeding. Grip reduced. We need imaging to rule out deeper strain." Grace nodded because that was easier than speaking. Adrenaline had drained, leaving her cold and shaky despite the warm, perfumed air. Broken glass glittered behind yellow markers on marble that probably had its own maintenance protocol. 2 technicians in Navy uniforms photographed each fragment, then sealed pieces in numbered evidence sleeves. Ms. Bellini stood over them with her tablet, checking item counts in real time. "Ms. Santos," she said, stepping closer, "your live stream was routed to internal archive. We need direct transfer from your device to preserve chain of custody." Grace pulled out her phone, thumbs stiff. "I duplicated it to cloud storage." "Excellent. Please hand it to Chief Rinaldi for forensic export." She hesitated for half a second, then gave the phone to Rinaldi. He clipped a cable to his tablet and started a checksum process with the calm of someone who had done this often. "File received. Hash generated. Timestamp 10:11 start, 10:17 end. Audio clean." Matteo's attention returned to Grace. His expression was still severe, but his tone lowered a degree. "Where's your daughter's inhaler pouch?" "In the protected suite with Teresa." "Bring them here," he told Bellini. Bellini inclined her head. Child therapist requested 3 minutes before movement. She is regulating breathing and orienting the child to the new room. 3 minutes, Matteo said, then escorted transfer with 2 female officers. Grace swallowed. "I need to see her now." "You will," Matteo said, "and you will see her standing, not panicking, because we do this in order." It was command, not comfort, and it landed in her chest like both at once. She pressed back against the chair, counted the medic's fingers around her palm, and kept breathing. Around them, the socialites were guided out through a secondary corridor by staff who never raised their voices. Mrs. Castell paused at the threshold, as if she might speak, then thought better of it and left with her chin high. By 10:24 a.m., The lounge smelled less of orchids and more of antiseptic wipes and printer toner from the legal station Bellini had set up on the dining console. A house attorney appeared in a navy suit, introduced herself as Ms. Klein, and began taking formal statements at a controlled pace. Name, position, what you heard, what you saw, exact words if possible. No one editorialized. No one was allowed to. When Grace's turn came, Matteo stayed 6 feet away near the window, speaking quietly into his phone about court liaison and emergency petition language. He did not interrupt. Grace gave her statement with the same cadence she used for charting adverse events. Date, time, sequence, direct quotes. She included her own actions without apology. I activated pediatric lockdown under emergency authority due credible threat of forced child removal. Klein asked if she understood she might be cross-examined about initiating containment. Grace met her eyes. Yes, I'd do it again. Klein's pen paused, then resumed. Noted. Rinaldi returned Grace's phone in a sterile evidence pouch with a temporary receipt. Original device remains with you. Forensic copy stored to legal vault and external counsel mirror. Nothing is being buried. The certainty in his voice eased a tight knot under Grace's ribs she had not admitted was there. Tomas had spent years teaching her systems favored men like him, men with clean cuffs and patient smiles. Watching this system document him in precise, unemotional detail felt disorienting in the best way. A soft knock came from the corridor. Teresa entered first with Elena, who moved quickly the moment she saw Grace, sunflower backpack bouncing against her side. Grace pushed up from the chair before the medic could protest and dropped to her knees despite the pull in her wrist. Elena collided gently into her chest and held on with fierce, small arms. "You're shaking," Elena whispered. "So are you." "A little." Grace leaned back enough to check her face, her color, her breathing rate. "Any chest tightness?" Elena shook her head. "Miss Nora did balloon breaths with me." A woman in a cream cardigan behind Teresa gave a small nod. "Nora Patel, child therapist. She's stable, responsive, no immediate distress escalation. She asked for her mother and for the blue pouch. Both good signs." "Thank you," Grace said, voice rough. Nora crouched to Elena's level. "Do you want to stay by Mom while the adults do paperwork, or color with me at the table where you can still see her?" Elena glanced up at Grace, then pointed to the nearby console. "Color there, near the light." Matteo, who had ended his call, looked at Elena when she said it. Something unreadable crossed his face and vanished. He gestured to a security officer. "Move a lamp to that table. Keep sightline open." A brass floor lamp was repositioned within seconds. Elena settled with fresh paper and a box of pencils someone produced from nowhere. Grace sat again for a second round of evaluation, this one from the private physician who had overseen the original pediatric case. "You are done working this shift," he said after examining her wrist. "I'm assigning coverage. You need anti-inflammatory medication, ice cycles, and rest." "I can still monitor the post-op patient," Grace began. "No," Matteo said. And then, to the physician, "Compensate her full contracted block. Add hazard supplement." Grace looked up sharply. "I didn't ask for charity." "It isn't charity," Matteo replied. "It is payment for work and risk incurred under my roof." The old reflex to refuse fought with pure exhaustion. She let it go. "Fine. Good." A uniformed city officer arrived at 10:37, followed by a second and a transport supervisor. Rinaldi handed over custody paperwork, body cam links, and a printed incident timeline from Bellini's tablet. The officer reviewed the documents, then approached Grace with professional restraint. "Ms. Santos, We have probable cause for assault and attempted custodial interference based on witness statements and video. We'll need your formal complaint signature. Grace took the pen in her left hand and signed, each letter deliberate. The officer nodded once. You'll receive a case number by text within the hour. That external confirmation landed like a floor under her feet. After police departed with Tomas through service access, the penthouse finally exhaled. Staff reopened selected corridors. Housekeeping replaced shattered paneling with temporary safety screens. The pulse of crisis shifted to the slower work of aftermath. Forms, phone calls, archived files, legal language that would travel farther than anger ever could. Matteo stood near the edge of the lounge, black coat still damp at the hem, speaking with counsel in low Italian-inflected English about emergency protective order enforcement. Grace watched him while pretending not to, trying to reconcile Elena's drawing with the man issuing chain-of-custody directives like battlefield commands. Predatory control and discipline protection wore similar silhouettes from a distance. Up close, the differences were in consent, documentation, and who got to choose. When counsel left for the court filing office, Matteo crossed to Grace and stopped at respectful range. Next 24 hours, he said, you will have voluntary security on transport and at your residence. You can decline at any point. If you accept, team assignments are female-led unless you request otherwise. Grace blinked at the explicit choice. You're asking? I am stating options and waiting for your decision. She looked toward Elena, who was drawing with her feet tucked under the chair, lips moving as she narrated colors to herself. I accept transport and building entry coverage. No one inside my apartment. Done. Matteo turned to Rinaldi. Write it exactly like that. No expansion without her consent. Rinaldi typed. Confirmed. The second movement of the morning began quietly, almost without warning. Elena rose from her chair with a new page in her hand and walked toward Matteo. Not fearful, just intent. Grace tensed out of habit, then forced herself to stay seated and watch. Elena stopped in front of him and held up the drawing. 3 figures again, heavier lines this time, each standing beneath a yellow circle that might have been a ceiling light. She pointed at the tallest figure in black pencil. You said this, she told him with grave certainty. Stay near the light, little star. The room stilled. Even Bellini looked up from her tablet. Matteo lowered himself into a crouch so he was eye level with her. His voice was quieter than Grace had heard all day. I did. You were by the pharmacy, Elena said. And by the broken bus ad. I was. Grace's pulse climbed again, but for a different reason. She stood, crossed the few steps, and stopped beside Elena. Why were you there? Matteo remained crouched for a beat, then rose slowly. Because your route was flagged by a shelter advocate who consults for one of our foundations. Repeat harassment pattern. Child present, night transit. My security team monitors high-risk zones when we can do so without escalation. Grace stared at him. You had people watching us. I had people watching the perimeter, he said. Not your home, not your private conversations. Entry points near clinic, pharmacy, and bus transfer, where known coercive partners tend to appear. Why not tell me? Because anonymous protection is useful only when it doesn't become another burden you have to manage. He paused, jaw tightening for the first time. And because disclosure can trigger retaliation if the wrong person hears it. It was a rational answer, infuriating and oddly merciful at once. Grace heard both truths inside it. You made that decision for me. Yes, he said. Today, I'm not making decisions for you. I'm giving you evidence, options, and records. He reached into his coat and removed a slim envelope, handing it to her without stepping closer. Inside was a printed log, dates, times, locations, brief incident codes. November 3rd, Pharmacy, West Lot. Male subject loitering, no contact. November 17th, bus transfer glass shelter. Same vehicle observed twice. December 5th, urgent care exit. Escort shadow, no engagement. Names were redacted except hers and Elena's initials. Grace looked up, throat tight. This is months. 4 months, Mateo said. Nora, the therapist, gently guided Elena back to the table, giving the adults space without making it obvious. Rain softened against the windows, now a steady hiss instead of impact. Somewhere down the hall, the recovering child laughed at something a nurse said. A bright, ordinary sound in a day that had been anything but ordinary. Grace held the envelope against her splint. People don't fund this kind of operation out of convenience. No, Mateo said. The word sat between them until she forced herself to ask the question she had been circling since Elena named the drawing. Then what is it? Guilt? Reputation management? His gaze shifted briefly to the rain-silvered glass, then back to her. The control in his expression thinned just enough to reveal the man beneath the command structure. A custody handoff was violated in my family years ago, he said. My sister trusted the calendar, the paperwork, the polite language. It was not enough. He did not elaborate, and he did not need to. Grief moved through those sentences like a current. After that, I built protocols I wish had existed for her. Grace felt her anger lose its clean edges, replaced by something heavier and more complicated. Not absolution, not trust, recognition. I'm sorry, she said, and meant it. He inclined his head once, accepting the words without performance. Use the system we built, or don't. But if you use it, it will hold. At 11:06 a.m., Bellini approached with a fresh packet. Emergency order draft is ready for your review, Ms. Santos. Transportation to your residence can leave in 15 minutes. The clinic director has been notified you are medically excused for 48 hours with pay through private shift coverage. Grace exhaled slowly, feeling each piece click into place. Evidence stored, report filed, child evaluated, transport arranged, choice documented. Controlled aftermath instead of chaos. She looked to Elena, who had finished coloring and was now printing one careful word under the third figure in black pencil. Safe. Grace stared at the penciled word until the letters blurred, then sharpened again. Safe. Elena had written it with the careful pressure she used when she wanted adults to stop arguing and pay attention. Mateo stepped back first, giving the child room, and that single movement hit Grace harder than any speech. Men like Thomas moved closer when they wanted obedience. Mateo created distance when she needed breath, and the contrast unsettled her as much as it steadied her. Misakix, Bellini placed the emergency order packet on the console and angled it toward Grace's uninjured hand. Read pages 3 through 7 in full. Those are your decision points. If any language overreaches, we revise before filing. Grace nodded and sat at the lamp-lit table where Elena had been coloring. Paper smelled faintly of toner and linen starch. The first page carried case numbers, statutory references, and a temporary clause restricting contact at home, school, medical settings, and transit routes. Her chest tightened at the phrase child exchange prohibited pending court review. It was legal language for what she had known in her bones for years. There would be no more handoffs in parking lots while he smiled for strangers. Mateo remained near the window, speaking quietly with Rinaldi about route rotation and entry logs. His coat was still damp at the hem, dark wool catching fractured light from the chandelier. Grace hated that she noticed details like that while her wrist throbbed, and her daughter sat 10 feet away, drawing suns. She hated that fear and relief had braided together until she could not separate them cleanly. Her pulse rose when he crossed a room. Her shoulders dropped when he gave an order. Neither reaction felt safe by itself. By 11:18 a.m., the rain had softened to a steady hiss against the glass, and the penthouse had shifted from crisis rhythm to procedural rigor. Grace signed the complaint addendum Ms. Klein slid in front of her, initialed each evidentiary attachment, and requested one additional clause in the order. No communication through third parties except attorneys of record. Klein looked up, surprised. "That's precise," she said. "He sends polite people to do ugly work," Grace replied. "Close that door, too." "Done." When Klein moved away to revise the filing, Mateo approached and stopped at a measured distance, hands visible, voice low. "You're shaking again." Adrenaline drop. And anger. Grace let out a breath that almost became a laugh. "That too. Sit back." His tone shifted into command. Then he caught himself and rephrased. "May I check your splint?" The question landed with unusual force. She held out her arm. "Yes." His fingers were careful at the brace straps. No unnecessary contact, no performance. "Too tight?" he asked. "Fine." He nodded and released her wrist immediately. Grace watched him straighten, watched him build that controlled expression back into place like armor, and heard herself ask the question she had been holding since the lounge. "When you said no one touches her without your permission," she said, keeping her voice quiet so Elena could not hear, "did you mean me too?" Mateo's gaze locked on hers. "In that moment, I meant no one but medical staff touches you without clearance, because the scene was active and compromised." It sounded like ownership. It was perimeter language. He did not flinch from it. "And you're right to challenge it." Grace swallowed, throat dry. "I left one man who treated legal rights like title deeds. I can't survive another version with better tailoring." A muscle moved in Mateo's jaw, then stilled. "I am not asking you to trust me because I say the right words." He glanced toward Elena, who was now lining pencils by color beside Nora. "I'm asking you to verify me by structure, written terms, named limits, revocable consent." The clinical clarity should have cooled her. Instead, it deepened the conflict, because this was the language she had always needed from power and rarely received. "And if I revoke?" "Security withdraws from any zone you designate, except where court order requires distance from Miranda. That part is law, not me." She leaned back, eyes burning from fatigue. "You make control sound ethical." "It can be," he said. "Or predatory. The distinction is who chooses and who can walk away." The words settled under her ribs and stayed there. She looked down at the packet again, then added, "No surveillance at my workplace without written notice. No staff speaking to Elena unless I approve them by name. Female lead at residence perimeter. You already offered some of that. I want all of it documented." Mateo looked to Bellini. "Record exactly." Bellini typed without hesitation. Noted and added, "Miss Santos signs final version only after line-by-line review." Elena looked up then and waved her newest page. "Mommy, this son has glasses." Grace smiled despite herself. "Very professional son." Nora gave Grace a discreet thumbs up from behind Elena's chair, signaling the child had stabilized. That tiny, ordinary gesture did more for Grace's nervous system than any sedative could have. Her phone buzzed in the evidence pouch on the table. "Case number issued," the text read, followed by an officer's name and direct extension. external contact, real and logged. She screenshotted it, forwarded it to her attorney intake, and printed a copy through Bellini Station so paper existed beyond any app failure. Then another message arrived from Rosa. "Elena okay? Building gossip says police at Rich Tower." Grace typed back with stiff fingers. "She's safe with me. Going home with escort soon. Thank you for this morning." Rosa replied in 10 seconds. Always. A landline on Bellini's tablet chimed. Bellini answered, listened, then lifted her eyes to Grace. Processing requested a victim impact supplement before arraignment intake. They can take it now by secure line. You are not obligated. Grace felt the old instinct to avoid, delay, stay small. Then she remembered Tomas's hand on her scar and Elena's fist in her scrub hem. "Set it up," she said. Mateo's head turned sharply. "You don't need to do that while you're injured." "I know." Grace met his gaze. "I'm doing it anyway." That was the second time in one day she had shifted the board before anyone rescued her, and she saw recognition in his eyes when he stepped back. "Then we do it with counsel present," he said. "No private channel." Within minutes, a secure speaker line opened in the study adjacent to the lounge. Warm wood paneling, long table, muted city skyline beyond rain-streaked glass. Klein sat at Grace's right with a legal pad. Mateo stood near the door, silent, not looming, but unmistakably there. Bellini routed the call through recording software and stated the date, time, and participants for chain of custody purposes. The officer on the line confirmed identity and began. "Ms. Santos, this statement may be presented at initial appearance. Describe your fear level at the time of contact." Grace kept her voice steady. "High and immediate. Mr. Aranda has a documented pattern of coercive control, escalating from verbal pressure to physical force when denied access." "Did he make claims regarding the child?" "Yes. He said I would hand over my daughter today. He threatened court retaliation if I refused." "Did you believe he intended immediate removal?" "Yes." A second voice cut onto the line. Male, smooth, familiar in the way poison could be familiar. "Grace, don't dramatize this. You're overtired and being manipulated." Klein's pen stopped. "Who is that?" The officer answered, clipped and irritated. Aranda attempted to speak during transport hold. "Muting now." "Don't mute me," Tomas snapped, volume rising. "She is my family. She is mine to—" Grace leaned toward the microphone before anyone else spoke. Her hands shook, but her tone did not. "Record this clearly. I reject all direct and indirect contact outside counsel. You do not own me. You do not own Elena. Any approach to our home, school, clinic, transit stops, or caregivers is harassment and will be prosecuted." Silence hit the line for one beat. Then Tomas laughed, brittle and disbelieving. "You think this man can keep you forever?" Mateo stepped closer, voice low and edged with restrained fury. "She keeps herself. I enforce distance. Learn the distinction." Tomas exhaled hard into the microphone. "You think she chose you?" Grace answered before Mateo could. "I chose terms. I chose evidence. I chose the law over your threats. That is what you cannot stand." The officer cut in. Statement captured. "Aranda is now fully muted." Tomas still shouted faintly in the background, words indistinct through the mute gate, then gone as the line transferred back to official protocol. The officer confirmed supplemental filing receipt and provided a second confirmation code for the emergency order docket. Klein wrote both numbers, tore the page, and handed it to Grace like a receipt for reclaimed ground. Call terminated. Recording saved. Bellini verbally confirmed archive location and backup server mirror. Every piece of contact had an outcome now, documented and stored. Grace sat very still after the line clicked off, heart pounding against her ribs. Mateo did not touch her. He moved a glass of water within reach and waited. After several seconds, she said, "When he says mine, I still hear the years." Mateo's reply was quiet. "Then we answer with years of distance, enforced one order at a time." She looked at him, at the restraint he carried like a blade kept sheathed by discipline, and felt that dangerous pull again, toward competence, toward safety, toward the man Elena had named before Grace could trust her own eyes. Attraction was there, sharp and undeniable. Fear stood beside it, equally real. She chose neither denial nor surrender. "I won't be kept," she said. "I know. I won't be managed. I know." She rose, gathering the revised order packet, the case numbers, and Elena's drawing with safe written beneath the third figure. "Then hear mine," she said, voice steadying as she spoke. "My daughter is under my authority. My home is under my rules. If you protect us, you do it by consent, on paper and in daylight. Do you understand me?" Mateo held her gaze for a long moment, then inclined his head once. "Yes, Grace. And for the record, while he hunts ownership language, I have only one claim. No one harms either of you again." It was not a promise of possession. It was a vow of perimeter, offered and heard in the open. Grace turned toward the lounge where Elena waited under the lamp. And this time, when she moved, the floor under her felt solid. The next instruction came from Ms. Bellini, crisp and practical, as if she understood that Grace could only move if the next step had a name. "Transport is ready in the East Bay. Before you leave, there are 2 signatures outstanding and 1 clarification from security for your records." Grace followed her to the console with Elena at her side, sunflower backpack bumping against her leg. Rinaldi stood there with a sealed evidence case and a printed form. "Your original live stream remains on your phone," he said. "Forensic mirror copied to police, family court, and your counsel. This receipt closes our chain on the house side." Grace read every line before signing. Her wrist ached under the splint, but her name came out steady. "The camera dropout," she said. 12 seconds in corridor C. What caused it? Rinaldi tapped his tablet and rotated it toward her. A still frame showed a coin-sized device magnetized beneath a service console. "Signal jammer. Low range, timed pulse. Recovered and bagged. Prints pending, but valet statement confirms Mr. Aranda's assistant entered through service before guest intake." The strange gap had a body now, not just dread. Grace nodded once. "And the valet?" "He requested protective anonymity and gave a full statement," Bellini said. "He was shaking because Aranda threatened to expose his immigration paperwork if he refused entry language." That settled another splinter. Bellini slid a second document over. "Mrs. Castell submitted a witness affidavit 20 minutes ago. She acknowledged hearing coercive statements and your refusal of contact. Her earlier silence is noted in her own words as cowardice in a room where status mattered too much." Grace looked up, surprised despite herself. The loaded pause at the doorway had not vanished into polite society. It had become evidence. Her phone buzzed with an email banner from Attorney Intake. Subject line received. Documentation 214 overnight plus incident packet. Her lawyer's paralegal had replied with filing confirmation numbers and a note that the blocked unknown number from overnight had been preserved by subpoena request. Even old threads were being pulled into one rope. By 12:07 p.m., rain had thinned to mist. Grace and Elena rode down in a private elevator with Teresa and two female officers assigned to transport detail. Mateo waited in the parking bay, near a black SUV. Dark coat buttoned, expression unreadable. He didn't open the door until Grace gave a small nod. Consent, then movement. "I'll follow in a second car," he said. "You'll have perimeter at your building entrance only, exactly as ordered." Grace adjusted Elena's jacket and met his eyes. "Thank you for not changing terms." "I said daylight and paper," he replied. "I meant it." At the apartment building, Rosa was already on the stoop in house slippers and a raincoat thrown over her scrubs, arms crossed, fierce and relieved. She pulled Grace into a careful one-armed hug to avoid the splint, then cupped Elena's face. "You two look like you fought a hurricane." "Feels accurate," Grace said. Rosa eyed the security officers, then Mateo's car idling at the curb. "That the black coat man?" Grace exhaled. "Yes." Complicated answer, but yes. Rosa nodded as if filing the complexity for later. "Soup is hot. You're both eating before paperwork eats you." Inside, the apartment smelled of garlic, detergent, and radiator heat. It was cramped and peeling in hers. One officer stayed in the hallway by the stairwell camera. The other remained at street level. No one crossed her threshold. Grace fed Elena, took her anti-inflammatory, and sat at the kitchen table while Klein joined by encrypted video to walk her through final emergency order language line by line. No third-party contact, no school approach, no transit proximity, no exceptions except counsel of record. Grace approved each clause, and at 2:16 p.m., a family court judge signed temporary enforcement pending full hearing. 48 hours later, the courthouse air felt colder than the weather outside. Old stone holding winter in its walls. Grace sat at counsel table in a navy cardigan over borrowed slacks, splint hidden under her sleeve. Elena stayed in a child services room upstairs with Nora and a box of puzzles. Mateo sat one row behind Grace with Rinaldi, not beside her, not speaking unless asked. The distance was deliberate and protective in its own way. Tomas entered in county transport khaki, face composed for cameras, then hardening when he saw the room layout already against him. The prosecution played corridor footage, audio from Grace's live stream, and body cam transfer clips. The trembling valet testified behind a privacy screen. Mrs. Castell testified in person, pearls replaced with a plain chain, voice unsteady but clear. "I heard him say she would hand over the child that day," she said. "I did nothing in the moment. I am correcting that now." When the defense argued overreach by private security, Klein called Mateo. He took the oath with the same contained stillness Grace had seen in the lounge. Under questioning, he disclosed the domestic violence transit program he funded and why. "My sister died after a custody handoff violation," he said, voice low, no flourish. "The paperwork existed. The risk assessment did not. Since then, my foundation underwrites anonymous route protection for high-risk caregivers, where legal systems lag in real time." The courtroom went very quiet. Grace had known the outline. Hearing it under oath made it heavier. He didn't use grief as theater. He used it as reason. Judge Harrow reviewed the emergency order, then looked over her glasses at Grace. "Miss Santos, do you request continued protective perimeter under the conditions you authored?" "I do," Grace said. "Voluntary, revocable, residence exterior only, and no contact with my child without my consent." So ordered. The final rupture came in the parking transfer bay after adjournment, where microphones clustered like metal flowers and reporters called names into the damp air. Deputies moved Tomas toward the transport van. He twisted suddenly, wrenching one arm loose and lunging 2 steps toward Grace, shouting, "You are still my family." Everything compressed. Mateo intercepted at the shoulder line with clean, controlled force, turning Tomas away from Grace without striking him. Deputies closed immediately, restraint resecured. Cameras flashed, voices overlapped. Grace stepped forward before anyone could pull her back, lifted her chin toward the microphone bank, and spoke into the noise with a clarity that cut through it. "You don't own me, you don't own my daughter, and you will never come within 500 feet of us again. That is law now." The words landed. Even the reporters paused for a beat before the questions resumed. Tomas was placed in the van and taken back inside without another opening. Sentencing took place 3 weeks later in the same courtroom. No spectacle this time. Just fluorescent light and exhausted people in winter coats. Grace read her victim impact statement aloud, hands trembling only once when she described Elena learning to scan doorways. The judge imposed custodial time for attempted kidnapping, coercion, and assault, plus mandatory no-contact extensions and supervised legal channels only. Restitution included relocation funding, medical costs, and legal fees. The clerk handed Grace stamped copies before she left. Paper, date, seal. Enforceable reality. By the second week of March, Grace stood in a narrow townhouse kitchen with unopened boxes stacked like cautious promises. The place was modest by Viscari standards and miraculous by hers. Working locks, bright stairwell lights, a school bus stop visible from the front window, and clinic shuttle access 3 blocks away. Restitution covered the lease. Her new role at a community pediatric clinic started Monday, daytime hours, benefits, and an on-site social worker who already knew Elena's asthma plan. Rosa unpacked mugs while muttering about rich men and proper smoke detectors. Nora dropped off a breathing game workbook for Elena and confirmed her weekly sessions. Dr. Liao called to congratulate Grace and remind her she still owed him one honest sleep cycle. Every external contact that had entered the storm now touched the shore. At dusk, Grace checked the evidence folder one last time at the dining table. Police case number, certified hearing transcript, signed protective order, jammer recovery report, valet statement code, Mrs. Castell affidavit copy, emergency medical note, and the envelope Mateo had given her, with 4 months of perimeter logs. She scanned each document into 2 encrypted drives, printed duplicates, and placed one set in a fireproof box bolted inside a closet shelf. She labeled another folder abandoned and put exactly one item inside it. The unknown number call that carrier records could not conclusively tie to a speaker. Not useful enough for court, noted and closed. The doorbell rang at 7:14. One ring, then silence. Grace checked the camera feed first. Mateo stood on the porch under the new motion light, black coat open, hands empty. No security team visible at the curb. She opened the door halfway. "You're early." I said 7:30. "You're right." A rare flicker of contrition crossed his face. "I can wait in the car." Grace considered him, then stepped back 1 pace. 5 minutes. "Elena wants to show you something." He entered only after she moved fully aside. Inside, he stopped at the threshold of the living room and kept there, as if an invisible line mattered. Elena ran down the hall in socks, clutching fresh paper. "I fixed it," she announced, holding up the drawing with both hands. 3 figures stood beneath a square yellow porch light, hands linked. Above them she had printed "Mommy, me," and over the tall figure in black, "Safe," in careful block letters. No crowns, no hearts, no fantasy. Just names and the words she trusted. Mateo looked at the page for a long second, then crouched to her level. "May I keep a copy?" Elena looked to Grace first. Grace nodded. One copy. Elena beamed. Mommy says rules make safe. She's right, Mateo said. Grace walked them to the porch 5 minutes later. The night carried damp earth and distant traffic, ordinary city sounds that no longer felt like warning every second. Mateo paused on the top step. Perimeter schedule is in your inbox, he said. You can amend or end it any time. I know. Grace folded her arms against the chill. Dinner Sunday. Here. Rosa will interrogate you. I will answer what she asks. A small smile touched Grace's mouth and was gone. Good. He descended the steps, then looked back once, waiting without pressing. Grace held his gaze and gave a single nod that was not surrender, not distance, but chosen continuation under terms she had written herself. When she locked the door, Elena slipped her hand into Grace's good hand and leaned against her hip. Grace turned the deadbolt, checked the window latches, and switched on the porch light, steady and bright, before carrying the drawing to the fridge and placing it at eye level with one flat magnet.